This is CUNY TV, the City University of New York.
Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge, and welcome to Eldridge & Company. It's been more than a year since Les Leopold last visited this program. He's the author of the book, The Looting of America, How Wall Street's Game of Fantasy Finance Destroyed Our Jobs, Pensions, and Prosperity, and What We Can Do About It. And he's also the founder and director of the Labor Institute as well as the Public Health Institute. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So what's Wall Street doing to us now? How has it changed? When was the book written? I'm sorry.
The book was written in 2009,
Okay.
right as the crash, the year after it came out the year after the crash was done. It was written during the heavy period of the crash, so that was a lot of fun, the kind of live and in color kind of thing. Much of the basic operation of high finance is still the same. And there are really two functions to high finance, one that we need and one that we desperately don't need. What we need is the transferring of savings to investment. Unfortunately now, the institutions that do this are bigger than they were. They were too big to fail before, they're bigger now. The top 6 banks account for a greater percentage of all the banking in the country than ever before. So that's a danger. But on top of that, the second function is basically financial gambling. It's a very sophisticated form of gambling, and some parts of it are desperately rigged. They were rigged before, and they're still rigged now. And that part literally extracts from the American people a hidden tax. We are paying a little bit extra all the time that when we make our pension funds make trades on the stock market, when we make trades with our 401k, there's a little bit of vigorish that goes to the top hedge funds and banks that engage in high frequency trading. So that there's a lot going on there that we'd all be better off if it didn't exist at all. And there's
are they still doing the collateralized swaps or whatever you called it? And
the synthetic collateralized debt obligations? Yeah. They're trying to ramp that up again. They are definitely still doing credit default swaps, which is a form of financial insurance that everyone thinks is the cat's meow. And they've been playing a very heavy game around, or they were, around the banking crisis in Europe. And wherever there's a crisis, finance swoops in to see if they can make a little bit out of the misery, make a little bit extra out of the misery. And I don't think that work is all that productive for the
when you went let's go back to the banks.
Yeah.
I mean, they're supposed to invest. Are they investing?
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, enough.
But we haven't solved the most basic problem, which is why do we need banks that are so large and so powerful that if they did implode, it would take down the whole economy? And I think a very strong case could be made for breaking them into smithereens, that I think that we should have, we're better off with thousands of smaller regional state banks than we are with these mega banks.
Well, I thought that maybe that was an intent in some of the that was a big debate in Congress, right?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, it didn't get very far because everyone who, well, first of all, economic policy is made in Washington often with a revolving door of people that are coming out of Wall Street, out of these large institutions. And that's how they see the world. And a lot of congressmen end up going into Wall Street.
Wall Street.
Well, look at Orzag, who was the budget director. I found this kind of unconscionable. He went from the Obama administration to taking a $2 million a year or so job at Citigroup. The same bank that was basically saved from destruction through the bailout process. You'd think there'd be, the guy could have done
some separation.
Well, he could have done a heck of a good job at a university someplace. Why did he have to go to Citigroup. So you think the idea of big banks dominating an economy is in their DNA because these are the people going back and forth. I'm not sure that that's a very
And
good
it
thing.
turns out, doesn't it, that the banks got more assistance bailout than we knew about.
Yeah, well,
You talked
yeah,
about that in an article.
yes,
about the secret.
Right. There were people at the time who saw this. There were all these other ways to get money from the government, basically unannounced, secret loan facilities that that all the banks and the large hedge funds took advantage of to the tune of $7.7 trillion. And then they keep, turning them over and turning them over. So, the American taxpayer, there's been an enormous subsidy for Wall Street. And meanwhile, the sad part is Wall Street gamble. I mean, you go to Vegas, you lose your money, and then the American taxpayer picks up the tab. And we've picked up the tab in two ways. Not only have we bailed out these large players, the large hedge funds, the large investment banks, large banks in general, but we have to make up for the hole that they made in the economy. So all this conversation about belt tightening and the layoffs of state and local government employees and the attacks on pensions and on unions and all that, and public sector unions, all that is a direct result from the Wall Street crash. And what we're not talking about is reparations. I mean, the people who created the toxic mess ought to pay to clean up the toxic waste. And part of the toxic debris are these budget deficits. And there should have been a way to tax Wall Street to make state and local governments whole, because they didn't do anything wrong.
Interesting. But is that over? You think that'll never happen?
I think the jury is still out. I think the American public genuinely is angry at Wall Street, at the collective, but really what they're angry at is high finance and the people who kind of live in a way in their own universe of what they think is productive and make sums of money that are so wild that I don't think we can comprehend it. In working on my second book, I realized that as bad as I thought Wall Street was when I did the first book, it's worse. And the income gaps are greater than I ever possibly
Tell us what a hedge fund is and who runs it.
It's a gardening company, and it trims hedges. There are about 8 to 10,000 hedge funds, and what they really are funds for large institutions and very wealthy people that engage in a variety of strategies to pluck money out of financial markets all over the world. There's a wide variety of hedge funds. Some of them are almost like Bain Capital private equity. Some of them are strictly, gambling on the financial markets. But they all claim to be able to get higher rates of returns than your normal money managers around the country. So you have to ask yourself, where's that extra rate?
Was Madoff a hedge fund operator?
Well, Madoff was a make-believe hedge fund. Madoff had two things. There's actually a very interesting story about Madoff. Madoff had two things going. He had a brokerage house, more or less, where he did trades, and then he had a hedge fund where he ran his Ponzi scheme. Now, he had a remarkable record of producing basically 1% a month return all the time, no matter what was going on in the markets. And hedge funds tend to go up and down a lot more than that. So his consistency raised some eyebrows. But here's why very smart people still put their money in his fund. They thought he was front-running the trades of his brokerage house. In other words, that he knew what people were buying, and he would buy that ahead of time and then sell it to them for a little profit, and that was going into his hedge funds. So they basically thought he was cheating the old-fashioned way, the way any good hedge fund would cheat. Right. We'll front run. We'll do insider trading. We'll do little things.
Illegal.
Illegal or barely legal,
Classy.
but not so bad. Nobody was getting caught doing that. So they figured that's what he was doing. They didn't know he was running an absolute, mammoth Ponzi scheme.
So a hedge fund operator they work through a brokerage? I'm so naive about this. I don't understand.
What happens is you get a Wall Street hotshot who's been working at a trading desk for a while, and he says, look, I want to go on my own. So he goes out and he creates this partnership where he's the managing partner, and then the investors are smaller partners, and he gets 20% of all the profits that are made, plus 2% of all the assets he brings in. And he places his trades all over the place. He may do it through a Goldman Sachs, or he may do it through 7 different places, or they may try to do it themselves. But they're not, this is not a mom and pop operation. It's small, it may not have 25 or 30 employees, and it takes advantages of other institutions. The key thing, though, is it claims to get a higher rate of return than the rest of us could possibly dream of. And some of them get enormous rates of return.
And the taxes that they pay?
Ah, that's another whole story. They pay regular income taxes on the 2% fee, which mostly goes to run the place.
When they get for handling other people's departments.
Right. But their real income, the 20%, if it comes from gains that are held for a year or more, they get to only pay 15% on that. So the ones who are billionaires are paying pathetic income tax rates because they have this loophole. It's called carried interest, and it only applies to partnership. If they did the same work in a bank and got bonuses based on how well they did, they'd have to pay 35% top rate. But because they're in a hedge fund, they only have to pay the carried interest 15%. It's an enormous loophole. The government, Congress has been threatening to shut it for years. Hasn't happened because, as you can imagine, every single hedge fund is lined up against it. And then, of course, they drag in all the other partnerships, real estate, private equity.
And then they have all this money, and then they hire the lobbyists, and then they contribute to the campaigns.
And they make up
and now
unbelievable
they
stories.
contribute to the PACs.
Yeah. Yes, they're very powerful.
So they've really. So what's changed since the crisis? I mean, did the Dodd-Frank bill change anything?
It's changed some things, but what's happened is the bill got very watered down. So it's unclear. For example, one of the big things that all of us wanted to see happen was go back to 1930s Glass-Steagall, where you separate the 2 major kinds of banking. There's investment banking, which is where the gambling takes place, and then there's commercial banking, where we put our money, which is insured, federally insured.
Right.
So they didn't want federally insured money to mingle with gambling. So now, they didn't break that up into 2 institutions, but they said that you can't do certain kinds of gambling things in your investment side, but there are loopholes, and the loopholes are large enough to drive, some pretty big casinos right through it. They can still make markets, and that means that they have a lot of leeway. So there's tons of discussion. I'm afraid look, the biggest thing is it did not attack too big to fail in a real way. In other words, it didn't reduce the size of the Wall Street entities. And that conversation got lost very early on because they were afraid if they jiggled with Wall Street too much, the crash would get worse. And of course, in other words, too big to fail became bigger, and it exercised more influence. And
it's still true then, in their thinking.
More true.
Yeah. So who's on the side of trying to make the banks smaller?
Well, I think most Americans. There are probably, there's voices in Congress. But I think in general, what you have in the country, there's 2 parts of it. One is making the banks smaller. But there's the other piece of it, which is sucking out of Wall Street the play money, the gambling money, the money that allows them to make all these high-speed trades. And that could get done through a financial transaction tax. See, right now, there's a hidden financial transaction tax that you don't see, that the hedge funds and the high-frequency traders are collecting. It's a hidden tax. It's like a hidden sales tax. This would be an overt tax that would go to the public domain. The estimates are even a small financial transaction tax would generate $150 billion a year, which, by the way, is more than enough to send every kid in the country to a public community college, graduate school, whatever, for free, forever.
And they could learn some economics and finance,
yeah, well,
right?
So financial transaction tax would slow down the gambling. Basically, see, people say, well, just tax them afterwards. they always get away with that.
Yeah.
This is taxing
As
the
they
game
do-
before.
as they make the transaction.
Before, yeah. So they can't. The money's not theirs
Right.
yet. If they're going to make
Right.
1 million transactions in an hour, well, they're going to have to pay more for that. And that's going to mean there are going to be fewer transactions, which means less volatility on the stock market. Right now, some of the estimates are that 80% of the stock market transactions that you see every day are high-frequency traders. One high-frequency trader bragged that said, for me, a long-term trade is 2 seconds, holding a stock for 2 seconds. Now, how can that be good for the economy?
You're writing a book about this.
Yes.
I don't want to take all the suspense out of the book, but tell us about how much a hedge fund operator earns.
Well, by the way, the working title of the book is How to Make $1 Million an Hour. So that gives you an idea of what they make. The top hedge fund earner in 2010, we don't have 2011 yet, 2010 made $2.4 million an hour. That's $4.9 billion a year, assuming they worked a normal
40-hour week?
Yes.
Do they work a 40-hour?
I don't know. You know, they haven't. No one's allowed me yet to sit with them on a day-by-day basis to find out how they operate.
When did they start?
The first one was in the early 60s, I believe. This one guy who's mentioned in all these books, whose name I forget now, started up, but it really didn't get popular until deregulation set in. I mean, the biggest crime of all was the ideological push to deregulate Wall Street. Once we deregulated Wall Street,
And that happened?
starting in the mid-70s. Jimmy Carter took away the caps on credit cards. That was the first piece of deregulation. And then one thing after the other, you know, the end of the Glass-Steagall, the derivatives. And once it became like the 1920s again, we reproduced the 1929. It was like you could have called it. Reduce taxes on the super rich, deregulate Wall Street, you'll get too much money in the hands of a few, they'll gamble.
Now, what about Operation Wall Street? It's had
Occupy Wall Street.
Occupy Wall Street. It's had a very deep effect on the way we look at this now, don't you think?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think we have to remind ourselves where we were in the summer of 2011. But in the summer of 2011, Wall Street was kind of forgotten, and the conversation has shifted to, oh my God, we're deeply in debt. We have to tighten our belts. Both the Democrats and Republicans were offering, you know, or the Democrats especially were even offering grand, you know, compromises and schemes. They were willing to even cut Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid.
And we had this ridiculous discussion of the debt ceiling.
Debt ceiling, and the one that really blew my mind was that somebody cared that the rating agencies cut the AAA rating of U.S. securities. Now, I find this one of the most, I can't believe anybody would care. These are the same rating agencies that put AAA ratings on thousands of toxic bonds that after they crashed, they literally changed like about 10,000 ratings from AAA to junk. Now, you trust those people to rate American bonds or anything? I mean, they're basically, I hate to say this, but they're prostitutes for the financial industry. They're the bird dogs. They're the ones that go out. They fueled this conversation. Well, so all we were doing was talk. We don't want to be the next Greece, blah, 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 blah. Well, along comes Occupy Wall Street. And I must say, I had been begging for some kind of movement to grow up. You know, I wrote a piece 2 years before that called, you know, Obama's no FDR, but we're no mass movement. We're expecting Obama to do great
everything
things.
we want.
But where are we? Where are we protesting against Wall Street? We're not doing anything. And I was, you know, not getting a great response to that. And then, bam, these kids came out of nowhere, and they changed the national conversation. And they were able to do that, I think, for 3 reasons that are quite obvious now, but should have been obvious to us before. One, they had the right target. It was Occupy Wall Street, not Occupy Walmart, not Occupy GM. It was Occupy Wall Street, right target. They had the right framework. This is a conversation about the top fraction of the 1% and everybody else. It's not a conversation about bosses and workers and managers and, you know, consumers and producers. It's not that conversation. That's not what happened here. sometimes what gets me is I'm afraid that we suffer from financial amnesia.
Yeah.
Wall Street crashed the U.S. economy. Nobody else did. They did it all by themselves. That was a deregulated financial industry run wild. And they hadn't been sufficiently accountable for it. They hadn't been punished for it. And the kids said, guess what? You're the target. And this is the framework. And then their creative tactics and processes was the third.
And
made
it also
colorful.
started, didn't it, a lot because they saw the cuts in the budget, right, that affected their lives. And they also saw the resistance to taxing the rich. I mean, all of that discussion.
All went out the window. So they put it back
Yeah.
on the map and created the potential for an incredible mass movement in this country. Now watch what happened. Winter, Occupy Wall Street kind of went into hiatus.
And cities kicked them out of the public
And
spaces.
that whole process took place.
And who was pressuring the cities to kick them out of public spaces?
What do you
Real
think?
estate and Wall Street.
And what happened to the conversation? We're talking about debt again. Now we're talking about deficit and debt. But you can see the lingering attack on top financiers. Stay with us. We're still using the 99% language. But the conversation, we need a renewed Occupy Wall Street, and we need something for all people who are, the 99% need a way to mobilize against Wall Street. Otherwise, I'm afraid we're setting ourselves up for the next crash. The ripoff will take place, and then the crash will happen, and we'll pay for it again. And worse, between then and now, they're going to try to sell us on austerity. They're going to try to say that we need to tighten our belts to make up for the debt that they created. Now think about that. That's really the essence of the debt conversation. We tighten our belts to make up for the whole fiscal holes that were caused by the Wall Street crash. How come they're not paying
So
for
we
it?
lay off all the middle class public employees.
Cut their benefits.
We cut the union's ability to have any effect on people's lives. I mean, we do everything wrong. We're still doing it.
Yeah, we're still doing
Now,
it.
what will happen if there's a change in the electoral results this year? Do you think in the state legislatures and stuff, as a rebellion against what's happening, do you think people are really aware of it?
See, they can only, the state and local governments are imprisoned by their inability to really run up debts. And so unless the economy comes back quickly, real quickly, they're going to have to keep cutting. The alternative would have been use the financial transaction tax to collect $150 billion a year and then have revenue sharing with state governments to make up for the financial loss that took place in their economies.
Has that tax ever been introduced as legislation?
It exists for 300 years in England on their stock
Yeah.
market. And they're talking about it in Europe. And it's been, their bill's kicking around. DeFazio has one in Congress. It's kicking around. But the Obama administration, in one of these tell-all books said he was for it. But Geithner and Summers were very much against it. And Geithner's still there. And now the Obama administration is against it, which is
Why
unfortunate.
do you think Geithner is still there? It's amazing to me.
Well, I think he's a smart guy. I think he's sounds very reasonable. It's kind of Obama's kind of very reasonable guy. He's considered a public servant. He hasn't been a Wall Street. He's not a multimillionaire Wall Street type. But he's just one of a zillion that have that the whole Treasury Department's full of people that have gone back and forth. And he sees the world a certain way, and he's not alarmed the way I'm alarmed by the power of Wall Street. He doesn't see its corrosive power on American democracy, and I think it's really corrosive. When you're making that kind of money, and you're doing it in ways that I think are extremely dubious in terms of creating wealth for this country, I think it's siphoning wealth and it's cracking the democratic process. If we're going to ask people to tighten their belts to pay back debts caused by Wall Street crash and not have Wall Street make a major contribution to that, that's really a problem. And I think Americans are going to be very discouraged. They're already discouraged the political process doesn't function. And unfortunately, I asked to interview Geithner and he was too busy precisely about this financial transaction tax. I'd like to talk to him sometime because I think he's a smart guy. I don't know why he doesn't see this.
Right. And his father worked for foundations and everything, right? Nonprofit stuff. Excuse me. So if you were going to advise Operation Wall Street, if you had your vote, right? What is it? I don't know anyway. If you had your
This is
vote,
bad, this is
right,
good.
and you belong to a committee, strategy committee, what would you be proposing that they do this spring and summer?
Well, I'd be proposing that they find ways to involve the millions of other people who really are angry about Wall Street. Let their vanguard go out and do, demonstrations. I mean, frankly, I'd have them come out for Romney if he's the nominee. I'd follow him all over the country and come up with creative demonstrations that said, that's great. Bain Capital's wonderful. Lay off more people. We love it. It's great for the economy.
Buy more cars.
But that's only part of it. Step back and look at this. Maybe there were 2,000, 3,000 people involved in Zuccotti Park in New York. I'll bet you there were another million people in the metropolitan area that would have come out for demonstrations, would have been glad to get involved if there was something to get involved in. And I think the hardest thing is how to mobilize the rest of us who care. And I think there are lessons with how the populists did it. Actually, the last time we had a serious anti-Wall Street movement was in the 1880s. And they were set up, they had lots of small local chapters all over the country that involved all different kinds of people. And they had 4,000 lecturers, they called them then, that went around and talked to people about how, economic ideas. I think we need a mass popular education
Back to the
movement.
street corner speeches and soapboxes
Yeah,
and all that kind of stuff.
I think, libraries and high schools and PTA meetings and whatnot,
Yeah.
I think we need to, the economic literacy of the country has definitely gone up and is going up.
Yeah.
But it needs to go up higher so that we have the self-confidence to take on these people that look like, look, if you're making $1 million an hour, you must be a
smart.
genius.
Yeah, right.
And it must be good. It runs, it's circular
That's a
logic.
whole strain that goes through our entire lives, especially in the government and everything else. They respond to people who are rich. Look at Donald Trump and nonsense. We don't even know if he's rich.
Can never quite figure that out.
I don't mean to bring us down.
Right. But the idea, see, what I'm trying to ask a question in the next book is, okay, if they make all that money, economics tells you that they're supposed to be doing something that's worthwhile for the economy. There's supposed to be value created in exchange for all that money. And I'm having a heck of a hard time finding
What the contribution is.
Yeah, I think the contribution doesn't exist. I think it's primarily what economists call rent seeking, where it's this hidden tax. It's basically siphoning off wealth, not creating wealth. Well, if that becomes common knowledge, then I think we can have these guys on the run.
So when does your next book come out?
About a year from now.
All right, so
winter.
we look forward to seeing you then. And
I hope so.
it's so great to have this all demystified.
Well, I'm trying. Thank you.
And your book is still very relevant, right?
I think so.
An important background, so
It's better than me talking.
they should go to Amazon or wherever and buy it.
Yeah, it's cheap enough.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If there are any people you'd like to hear and topics you'd like us to explore, please let me know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.